know what really makes us mad? Is wasting money on CDs with only one or two good songs.
Yeah. Tell them about punk.
What's up, posers? Welcome to Punk Lotto Pod. I'm your co-host, Justin Hensley.
And I am your other co-host, Dylan Hensley.
And today we are talking with comic book artist Jay Gonzo. He is the creator of his own comic book series, Mano del Destino. He currently has a Kickstarter running right now to publish the series as a trade paperback flip book in both English and Spanish. It's a really cool concept. You'll hear him explain it more on his own. And Dylan, what are we talking about today?
And so the album that is the excuse to have a conversation is 1979's Germs GI, and it was a great conversation.
Yeah, so an iconic record, and from someone not in music themselves. So that's fun. I like having people who aren't musicians on too, because they also have opinions on albums. So. Well, hopefully you'll enjoy the show.
Someplace else they couldn't fix what I wanted to get fixed. But they were really cool. They were like, it's this, we just can't fix it here. So you need to go to, what's the next biggest city near you guys? It's like maybe 40 minutes away. I can't remember where they sent me.
Do you remember if it was east or west?
I think I had to head east a bit from where you guys were.
Maybe Statesville? About 30, 40 minutes away, yeah.
Yeah, I think it was a Ville, but everything's a Ville in that part of the. But I love that part of the country. I love driving through there. It's always beautiful. Even in the summer, it's kind of a nice break for me to get out of Phoenix. But
the temperature's not necessarily as hot here, but our humidity is fucking crazy. We
yeah,
had like a 79% humidity the other day, but it was still like 72 degrees.
That's so rough. But I've spent time in the jungles of Papua New Guinea, and it's like, dude, it's like 90% humidity and 90 degrees. So, and that all you can do is just kind of like lay down until you get, the sun goes down, and then you're like, all right, I guess I can move around a little bit for sunset.
Yeah, that's what our Augusts feel like here. It's that crazy. It's funny that like North Carolina will have the same humidity and the same temperature as a jungle in South America. It's wild.
Yeah. I don't know, man. 120 hurts no matter where you are.
Yeah, it really does. Yeah, I was gonna say, I think I met you twice at Heroes Con. Okay. It was the first year I was walking by tables in like Artist Alley, and I was like, oh shit, there's some luchador shit. So I went over there and talked to you for a little bit, and you were missing like issue 3.
Yeah, that was that year I was out of 3s. Yes, I remember that. It was a hard sell where I'm like, you can read 3 online, but I think I had 1 through 5 at that point. So you could read 1, 2, then 3 online, and then 4 and 5, and it's been such a weird, doing this on my own has been such a weird juggling act of like where I can put my resources. Like, do I print 4 again, or do I need to reprint 3, or and now I'm at the Kickstarter point in my life where I'm just like, I can't do this without people now. It's the 400-page book. I can't front that money and then try to make it back over the course of a year.
Was it Castle Key? Is it your company?
Yeah, that's me. That's all me. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm a graphic designer by trade, I guess. Like I spent 30 years in advertising and working my way up from graphic designer to like art director, senior art director, and then eventually I was like a creative director at an agency for a good while. And so all the design stuff and like kind of the look of my comic comes across very professional. And so people think that like you have to be a publisher to get into Diamond. So I had to do a DBA of my actual graphic design business is Jay Gonzo Designs. It's the LLC that I own. And the book itself had to be titled Jay Gonzo's Mano del Destino for legal reasons, because there was another book called Mano del Destino. It was a title of a book and not an actual, it was like a title of a trade from a Spanish language JLA book that came out. So DC owns Mano del Destino technically, or that version of it. So I had to my book had to have the Jay Gonzos on there. So I didn't want my company to be like Jay Gonzo Designs presents Jay Gonzo's Mano del Destino, because I worked for Todd McFarlane for 4 years, and I know what that kind of ego trip does to you. So I don't need everything to have my fucking name on it. So I was just like, I'm gonna just start my own. I had to do a DBA of my LLC to become a publisher, so I could get into Diamond back when I first started this. So I founded Castle and Key, and being the graphic designer that I am, I did like a whole business suite and designed my brand out pretty well, got it out in the world. And so yeah, people do kind of think that I'm a bigger entity than I, like people are like, oh, how's Castle and Key treating you? I'm like, well, it's me, so I'm treating me pretty okay, But actually this year I did put out another book. I'm putting out another book. My buddy Jason Krager is putting out a book called Hammer, and it's like Mad Max meets Ragnarok kind of stuff. It's like Vikings, but in the future and technology. And I'm doing like 4 pages and stuff, and that got funded, so that's happening. So I'm actually going to maybe start putting out other work through Castle and Key that's not, like I've got this infrastructure in place. I might as well help other people out. So, soon, 2021, if the industry comes back, I might be able to put out more. Yeah, that's the thing too. I mean, another reason why I went through Kickstarter is like, I did have ability to put the trade out through a publisher. I was talking to a few publishers, but they weren't really interested in Spanish and English. And then they also I don't know what the industry looks like right now. DC kind of seems to be done with making comics, and that's 30% of the industry going away. It's a big chunk, and then the COVID, is not helping at matters either. And so I'm like, man, I'm just going to go direct to market. I'm just going to go straight to the people who might want it, and bypass the whole direct market and not have to rely on an archaic infrastructure that may or may not exist in a month. And
yeah, it is wild. I remember in looking through Diamond, and I was like, the previews every month to figure out what I'm going to subscribe to for my store, or the store I shop at, and I saw that your art was in you did the art for a graphic novel through Image. I was like, whoa, shit, he's coming up.
I did that. Yeah, I did the La Voz de Mayo. Henry Brajas wrote that, and I did the art for it. Yeah, it was cool. 2020 was going to be my year, man. I had an Image trade that came out in November. I had Lamano issue 6 had wrapped up, so I was going to go on tour kind of with that. I had I did 9 pages in a Headlock story for Michael Kingston's Headlock Comics, and I think I did another 4-page story. I can't remember all of this. Dude, I did a ton in 2019, and and I worked so hard. I was so head down getting everything done. I finished my comic and everything. So the beginning, through the summer of 2020, was going to be me just going on tour to kind of make enough money so I could maybe take a chunk out of what I needed to get the trade done, so my Kickstarter goal wouldn't be quite what it is. And literally, I did 3 shows. I got Tucson Comic Con in with issue 6 under my belt, and that trade, and La Voz de Mayo, the Henry Baraja, the Image book had come out. But it's Tucson, so it's not a huge show. I mean, we did all right. We were on the news, and we got interviewed for the newspaper and stuff, and it was cool. So we got some notoriety. I went and did BCAP in San Francisco in January. And then a few weeks later, I did a show in Vegas. It was a library show. It was tiny, but it's guys I know, and I was helping them out. It was a good time. Literally on the drive back from that, when I'm cutting through the Nevada desert, we're hearing announcements about COVID and how Emerald City is losing people left and right, and how people were dropping out of. There had been a con that weekend, and people had left early. I think it was C2E2, right? A bunch of people left C2E2 early.
Right, yeah.
So it was that weekend, and then you heard rumors about how people were dropping out left and right out of Emerald City. And within a week, Emerald City got canceled, and then it was just, I thought Phoenix might be able to happen in May, and then that got pushed back, and then I thought Heroes might be able to happen, and then that officially canceled. Holding out hope for New York, and that's here we are, less than a month away from when New York was supposed to happen, and it's not going to happen. CXC folded, so I've been home with my trade paperback. That's all I can do is make the trade as cool as it can be.
For the people who don't know, let them know what the Kickstarter's goal is. What are you planning on doing? Because
okay,
just or the pitch, I guess, is basically.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, I'll give you the briefest of pitches here, so we can get into some punk rock talk. But so I'm currently kickstarting the trade paperback edition of my comic book, and so over the past several years, I did a 6-issue limited series of a comic book about a luchador who's set in this 1960s swanky jet age Mexico, where lucha libre is the most important thing in that world. Everything of any kind of importance gets settled by luchadors, business, law, anything. It's all luchador on luchador. So they're rock stars and politicians all rolled into one. This particular one was champion, which is a big deal, obviously, in this world. And he refuses to take a dive. He refuses to take money to take a dive. And his friends aren't too proud to take that money, so he's betrayed by his friends and unmasked in the ring. So he never gets to be that luchador again. So he, in his kind of fit of rage, he makes a Faustian bargain with this mysterious promoter who rolls up and is like, hey, I'll help you out with your revenge. And he gives him a new identity and a new power to get his revenge, the identity of La Mano del Destino. And like all good comic book Faustian bargains, of course there's strings attached. And he finds out pretty early that he's kind of bound by the conditions of this new identity he's assumed. And so he's trying to get his revenge. He's trying to get out of his deal, but he's also trying to remain the person that he knows himself to be in this kind of like Silver Age, storytelling style. Like my comic looks like an old comic book because it happens in the 60s in Mexico. So it's got this kind of like Marvel Silver Age kind of operatic bombast to it. And the comic looks like kind of old and weathered, like the blacks aren't quite 100%. You can see the color underneath them. So I wanted to like look and feel and smell like an old comic book, like it's on uncoated paper. So I have to print it on an offset press, right? Because you can't do digital onto newsprint, otherwise you lose the texture and the smell. And which people who love comics love that. So with the Kickstarter, I'm just trying to fund the collected edition of that. But the cool thing about the collected edition is this is very Latino subject matter. I mean, it was born out of my dissatisfaction with how Latin culture, how Mexican culture specifically, and then how lucha libre had been portrayed in American pop culture. It was kind of like a punchline, and every time you see Mexico, it's like dirty and brown looking. And just as a Chicano myself, I'm like I know my culture is like more bright and vibrant, and like every time you see it, it's like shitty and brown in a punchline. So I'm like, screw all that. We can swear, right? So,
oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm like fucking somebody needs to do a comic where the lucha libre is important, where they're treated like heroes, where the Mexican culture is bright and vibrant. And so I kind of, thus far I've been able to fund issue after issue because it's one issue at a time. I do, one about every year and a half or so. And I finally got it out. But so now that I have to collect them all, I just can't afford to do offset press on a 400-page book because it's all 172 story pages as they were first printed appear. The entire story is in English in this book, but it's a flip book. So if you flip it over, you get all of the story translated into Spanish on the other half of the book. And then there's like 24 pages of bonus material. There's 14 pinups by a lot of really great artists that are that are contributing to it. So it's like I wanted to make it worthwhile for the people who had bought the comics individually to want to buy the trade paperback. I also wanted to make it worthwhile to anyone who just wants to grab the comic, and I didn't want the Spanish language to seem like an add-on, like an addendum, like, oh, here's also the Spanish. So I that's why I did the flip book format. So like if you're a Spanish speaker and you buy it in Spanish, you can put the Spanish cover forward and you're in the front of the book. If you're an English speaker, you can flip it around the other way. So that's what I'm trying to do I'm trying to cover the printing of a 400-page offset press book, which is, it's a big number. I'm not going to lie, man. People look at the number like, holy shit. Like literally that number is so specific because all I'm doing is covering my cost to print and ship it. If you look at that number, it's like 39,242 or something like that. It's like, I could have rounded up, or I could have rounded down and hoped that I just covered it myself. But I'm like, I'm not trying to bilk anybody out of anything, and I'm not trying to get a page rate out of that either. Like I've done the work; it's there. The comics are there. I've kind of made my money back on those. This is literally just to get this kind of comic, like this authentic, Latinx comic, into the hands of people who would be fans of it. And part of kickstarting it too is that the direct market has been so neglectful of that market for so long that the people who would appreciate this, their ears aren't even out for it anymore. They don't know to go to a comic shop to even look for this. They don't even know to go to like comic sites to hear that it's being, recommended. Like they're not even being messaged to because they've been ignored for so long. So that's why I'm running the Kickstarter for 60 days so that I can just get this out there and get the word out, And my prizes are all, or my tier levels are all pretty, affordable, and it's also just the book mostly, with like some small things that can be put in the same envelope so I don't have to worry about shipping like posters and t-shirts or what have you. Like I literally just want to get the book out, and then I have like these other incentives for people. And I'm not making any money on any of it. You know what I mean? Like I know a lot of Kickstarter people do that where they're like, you raised a ton of money, and they're like, no, it'd be like all I did was cover my costs. So yeah. I mean, literally, I'm just kind of on this awareness campaign. We're like, here's the thing, check it out. Like go check the video out, go check the Kickstarter itself out. I try to answer all the questions there, and you can see that it's just about the book and getting it to people. It's not about getting me a new car or something like that. So.
I will say that I have issues. I think I have issues 1 through 5 of the print of the previous issues. So I don't have issue 6 yet. So I'm going to be getting it just so I can have issue 6.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna make a tier because 6 never really went out in the world because the world shut down. I think I'm gonna add a tier this week that has the book plus 6, like just issue 6. Because so many people have 1 through 5. So keep an eye out for that. But honestly, man, just send me your an address. I'll send you issue 6. As a thank you for having me on your show. Yeah.
I wanted to say though that one of my absolute favorite things about the book is the color scheme. Like your artwork like popped at me when I saw it at Heroes Con, and then like actually flipping through it and seeing like this really cool like selected color. Like it's not like you're trying to color as realistic as possible. It's like 4 or 5 colors per page or something like that. And it's like these purples and greens and yellows, and it looks absolutely gorgeous. And that offset printing makes it like even better.
Oh, thanks, man. Yeah, I really wanted to. What is it? I've been saying this a lot. Like, so all what is it? John Updike said that all art has a need to confess its artifice, like let you know that it's made up, right? So the curation of that color palette and the limiting of it is my confession of artifice. So you're not trying to compare it to reality. Like, this is a story. This is a curated reality. This is made up. So just enjoy the story and don't worry about whether it's, quote unquote real or not, or the realism of it. Because then all you're doing is comparing it to fidelity to source material. Does this apple look like an apple? Does that car look like a car? I'm dealing in ideas in my stories. Like, this is the idea of a car. This is the idea of an apple. This is the idea of a hero. And then when you're playing with ideas, it's more emotionally resonant than fixating in that part of your brain that's constantly evaluating its validity. You're just listening to the story part of it. And then also I really wanted like a Latino color palette. Like, I wanted to kind of show Mexico in those bright, vibrant hues that I know from my culture, as opposed to just everything being sepia tone and brown like that goddamn James Bond movie. Like, how you show a Day of the Dead parade and have it sepia tone and brown? Like, that just irked. Like, everyone's like, oh, that was so cool. I'm like, yeah, but it looks shitty and brown. Like, dude, it's all about like the bright orange marigolds and like just that eye-searing magenta that comes out and that chartreuse color and all of so. I really wanted to keep my palette more Latino, to make it look like this is true to the visual vernacular of Lucha Libre, right? Because those are like just the pageantry of Lucha Libre is so bright and vibrant and kind of on the gaudy side, but in like the funnest way possible. And I just wanted to translate that into everything in this world to let you know that Lucha Libre has permeated this entire world, but also to confess the artifice that like, yes, this is a curated reality, so maybe don't worry about realism so much, and just enjoy the story. And I kept it to, I think it's 9 colors. Oh, no, I had 12. There's 12 colors total in it. And there's also like 9 Ben-Day patterns that I make that are color on color. So I get kind of 9 secondary colors that I try not to use much. And a lot of that stems too from the technology of the 60s, right? Like, they only had 24 colors in those old comic books because that's how you could cut film and how many like film overlays you could have. And it also is like that kind of clever use of like, putting complementary colors near each other to kind of like let your make a perceptual third color is something that they did a lot in a lot of the kids stuff of the age of the 60s. If you look at those old Ben Cooper masks, like the Wolfman mask is like chartreuse and magenta, with like black lines on it. It's the wackiest color combos, but like that kind of like those old flexography technologies of like Ben Cooper really fed into like how I wanted to present this, because I remember having that Ben Cooper Spider-Man costume that has like the yellow and blue on it, as opposed to like red and blue, and like it was always like I remember just looking at in close detail like how they just had the lines of color so close to each other that they made a third color, and being fascinated by that. So it's one of those things that you don't see a lot of because we can print any color now. So you're like, well, if I want a purple, I'll just put purple in there. But I'm like, no, I'm gonna put just red and blue near each other and let your brain fill in the purple. But it also makes the viewer do a little more work, right? Like, it's a lot of interpretation, and that kind of like the more I ask the viewer or the reader to do, the kind of more emotionally involved that they get, because they put their experience in to fill in the gaps, right? That's the beauty of comic books, is that the reader fills in the space between the panels. And so like the more reductive you can do, the more abbreviation that you do, the more personal it becomes, because they're filling in more and more information from their own experience, as opposed to just showing every seam and stitch on something. And then all it is that, it's just a cosplayer now that you can be like, oh, that's that, you can kind of move past it, as opposed to you having to do any work. So yeah, it was all a very kind of conscious effort, and sometimes hard. I'm trying to figure out like how to separate things out when I only have like 9 colors to work with. I'm like, well, it can't be this color and it can't be that color. So now I'm down to 3. I'm like, oh, how do I make this work? But the clever problem solving of those old 60s comic artists, that Silver Age Marvel, like I've got so many I literally have like 20 Jack Kirby books sitting like right next to me right now. Like, I'll just, if I like, how would Jack do it? How would, Ditko do it? Just like, those guys problem solved and they figured it out. And some of it intuitively doesn't make sense, but when you look at it, you're like, oh yeah, that works. Like, that reads. So, sorry, that was a really long-winded answer.
No, it's great. It's funny.
Do you know the colorist name? Who was that from the Silver Age? Because it was like basically one colorist for like everything Marvel.
I've heard it and I couldn't tell you. Yeah, if you said it, I'd be like, yeah, that's right, but I don't know offhand. Sorry.
Is that Bill Rosen, or is he an inker?
I think Rosen's an inker, if I'm not mistaken. I'd have to look it up. Yeah,
because they didn't credit a lot of those colors.
Stan Goldberg.
What's that?
Stan Goldberg.
Yeah, there you go. And then I know Severin came in. Maureen Severin came in. Right. She came in later in the 60s, right? Like toward the end of it. But yes, yeah. And those guys, just, you see some of these old 60s comics and like the impact of the images were how they were colored. I mean, the artistry is obviously there, but you'll see like some clever color holds or some just weird blocks of like, the person's entirely in yellow and then the background is like, detailed in like shades of green or something. And it's just, I got to know as an artist, I got to think that a lot of it is just like them from keep A is trying to hit your deadline, and then B is to try to keep from getting bored all the time, like naturalistically coloring everything gets kind of like, I mean, every artist I know could draw photorealism at like, in 8th or 9th grade. And so, exaggerating and abbreviating is where the real fun comes in.
It's funny because I've seen like, I love the way that like comics from like the 60s and 70s and into the 80s like looked color wise. Yeah. And then like I've seen like the way Marvel will like reprint stuff, and they'll use like the original color palette, which is cool that they're using the original color palette, but that original color palette was chosen specifically because the page would change the color. Yeah,
it eats up a good tint or two of that, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So like the reprints look real odd because they're like digitally printed, like on a much cleaner paper or a slick paper, and it's like, these colors look off to me now, and I'd rather see them on like the yellowish newsprint like than the clean glossy pages.
Yeah, a lot of that stuff doesn't port to modernity very well, but people seem to be obsessed with it, or they'll recolor like some Jack Kirby work with like a modern color sensibility, and it just, man, anytime I see a blend on a Jack Kirby piece, it's like, oh, what are you guys doing here, man? But it reminds me when when I was a kid, when Turner Broadcast bought all those black and white movies and then colorized them. Because Americans still don't like black and white movies, but I'm just like, or subtitles, and I'm like, just get over it. Like it's like dubbing as opposed to subtitles. Like now I'm just gonna fixate on how weird it is that their lips don't match what they're saying, or now I'm just gonna look how weird it is that It's a Wonderful Life is in in color now. Like everyone's got a weird peach like everyone's the same skin color. That's the thing that really weirds me out. Like they never vary. Like everyone's like related to each other now. They have the exact same skin tone, and I guess they're. Their heart's in the right place, I guess. Like they want to bring it to the maximum amount of people, but it's just so heavy-handed. Just let the old things be old, and then make new things. Like you don't need to modernize old stuff all the time, right?
Right.
At least my time. But I'm in the business of like trading on nostalgia, so I don't know that I can really talk too much about that. At least I'm making new nostalgic stuff, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that your comic is set in the 60s. It has that. I like that jet age vibe that it has going for it, and it's got like the El Santo Blue Demon like vibes going on there, and Lucha Libre is like my favorite. I'm a big wrestling fan. Lucha Libre is my favorite like style of wrestling, and I feel like Americans don't get it to the degree like for example like watching like a CMLL match, and all it's like strange like. Everything's a trios match. You don't have to tag to get into the ring. It's a three. Yeah. Every match is a 3 falls match.
Best of 3. Yeah.
But you also have to pin 2 people or the captain by themselves, like to count as a fall. Yeah. It's tough, especially since a lot of that stuff isn't even like subtitled or translated for like only English speakers. So like you just kind of have to watch it and study it, and like. That's what made me fall in love with Lucha Libre, because I was just like, one, just stylistically, I love like the type of movesets that a lot of those wrestlers have. But even just watching a CMLL versus like a AAA, which kind of follows the more traditional like American just one fall type match, it's a lot more singles matches. But just like it's rewarding once you've like watched it long enough and you're like, oh, I understand all these rules now. Like I understand he's the captain, like because they called him out first individually, and so it's like. I don't know, but I love Lucha Libre stuff.
And those CMLL matches are there's no determined winner. Like you literally can you just have to like there's you're not trying to hurt each other, but you are trying to like one up each other to get the upper hand, to get the best of two. You can take it away. There can be an upset. There can be it's a rarity, and I think more and more they're being a little more scripted. But up until the 90s, they still like I remember hearing Cassandro did an interview on Snap Judgment. They did a really nice segment on Cassandro, and he was talking about how he was fighting to get the championship belt. He was going to be the first Exotico, which is a man who dresses like a woman for people who don't know. Which you gotta like love. Lucha Libre's been doing like inclusion of trans people for fucking 60 years now, and they were way ahead of the curve on that. yeah, so Cassandra was going to be the first Exotico champion, and in the interview he's talking about how he I was hoping I could win, he's like, yeah, because it's not scripted, like you just kind of have to get the upper hand, and so it's a lot more dynamic because you do have people. They're not going through the motions. They're actively plotting their strategy in real time, and having to adjust for it. And American wrestling is, it's like primarily completely scripted. They're calling it in the ring, but it's still the winner is predetermined. There's nothing on the line there really. And so the stakes are higher in Lucha Libre. And then American wrestling is kind of ego driven. It's all about imposition of will. It's like I'm stronger than him, bigger than him. And Lucha Libre, like that ego, they're egoless. Like their masks cover their faces. Like they're not about who they intrinsically are. They're only about what they do. Which is a very culturally resonant thing to Mexican culture because of our tenuous relationship with identity being both, like most of us being mestizos, where we're like part Mexican and part Spanish, right? We're part indigenous, part Spanish. So I'm as much conquistador as I am conquered. And so who I intrinsically am doesn't necessarily matter so much as what I do. And a lot of our heroes, like Zorro and what have you, like they're masked, like they transcend their own intrinsic value and become about their actions. And so Lucha Libre is about action. It's about effect. It's about leverage and agility. And American wrestling is about power and will and and stick to it. And it's a lot of intrinsic ego-based things as opposed to these kind of like cooperative, involved, egoless things that happen in Lucha Libre. But that's like a cultural difference too. Like I don't know that a lot of Americans can't warm to that because a lot of Americans like to have that indulge in their ego, right? Hence a lot of the problems that we're experiencing currently. But we don't need to get into any of that. But yeah, and then the complexity of it too. It's like it's like trying to figure out soccer rules, like tournament soccer rules, where you're like, wait, you can lose, but then have enough points to get past the person you beat. Like I don't. It's just yeah. So like those, like it just seems strange, and I think in a lot of ways it seems unfair because it assails the American sense of ego. It's like, I beat him, I won, I go on to the next thing. And we're like, well, you beat him this once, but you didn't have enough points or you didn't beat the right person, or there's another round, or what have you. It assails our sense of ego-driven fairness, which is why I think a lot of people have a hard time connecting with it. And then the fact that they're in masks and everything is shiny and glittery, it isn't cool enough for a lot of Americans. So hence the AAA, right? You get the kind of hot topic of wrestling happens. And everyone gets like, oh, cool. It's like dark and brooding, and it's everything wrong with superhero movies right now, where everything has to be dark and brooding. So, but it is for someone. I mean, there's a reason why the Joker made as much money as it did. It's this brilliantly made, terrible movie. So, yeah. I mean, that's how I've been. We don't need to get into that either. But I feel like I've wandered way off our topic.
Well, we've covered comic books, we've covered wrestling. Let's talk about punk rock. We'll get into the format of the show a little bit. So this is the show where we assign our guest a year, and they choose one punk or punk-related album for us to talk about. So we assigned you the year 1979.
The ice is coming, the sun's zooming in, meltdown expected, the wheat is going thin. Engines stop running, but I have no fear, 'cause London is drowning. I live by the river. This ain't no party, this ain't no disco, this ain't no fooling around. No time for dancing, more lovey-dovey. I ain't got time for that now. It's getting faster, moving faster now, it's getting out of hand. On the 10th floor down the back stairs into no man's land. Lights are flashing, cars are crashing, getting frequent now. I've got the spirit, lose the feeling, let it out somehow. Don't believe them, don't think back twice. You gotta suspect dice.
And before we
Were
get
either of you alive in 1979?
No, I was born in 86.
Okay. And
I was born in 1990, so.
Oh, God. Oh,
Definitely not.
Ouch, that hurts my head. Yeah. All right. So I was actually around in 79. I was born in 74, so I'm a little kid, but I do have memories, and we can get into that. So Continue.
Awesome.
I'll interrupt as I see fit.
Yeah. So before we get into your album that you selected, let's talk about a couple other records that came out in '79. Dylan, what are some notable releases from '79?
I gotta pull it up.
Oh yeah, sorry, I should
Can
have sent that in the link.
Let me tell you what I like when I was looking through those. What I stopped on a couple of times and didn't pick is so Joy Division's Unknown Pleasures comes out, and that's their first full-length EP. At this point, they've only put a couple albums or put a couple singles out through Factory. Like they put out Dead Souls, they put out Transmission, and I think it's just those two. And then this is Joy Division putting out their their first full-length record, right? And I think no band better exemplifies the transition from punk to post-punk than Joy Division, because they start off as Warsaw, and they're very kind of oi, like UK 69 kind of like, or not, what is it, UK 84 kind of sounding, like punk, like Charge GBH kind of punk sounding. And then they move into this post-punk, and they abandon all of that, and they get this real kind of weird ambient electronic post-punk sound that kind of this, and then the other album that came out that year is The Cure puts out Three Imaginary Boys, and that is like a shot across the bow of all people trying to partake of post-punk. Like I think those two records create what post-punk and later what goth would become just in those two records. And there's hints of goth in there, but goth isn't fully codified yet in the way that post-punk gets with those two coming out. Because with goth, like the Batcave doesn't even happen in London until like 83 or 84. So like, goth as a movement is still a few ways. I mean, I know Susie and the Banshees has like 2 albums out in 70 by 79, but she's still hanging on to her kind of like Bromley contingent roots, right? She's kind of that fangirl of the Pistols that she was when she was on the Phil Grundy show before the F word gets dropped by Steve Jones. So she's still kind of like, she's still like the last hurrah of punk, And I think the Slits put out an album that year too, right? Like and they're kind of still hanging on to like punk, because they had been kind of fangirls of the punk scene in general too. So I think that this is the year that post-punk really becomes its own thing, with especially with those two albums, with Joy Division and The Cure putting out their albums. And I believe that Bauhaus also puts out Bela Lugosi's Dead in '79 as a single before ahead of their album, because I think their first album doesn't come out till '80. Sorry, so much of this is off my head, the top of my head.
No, that's great. I actually forgot to look at what EPs also came out, because I sometimes like to do that just to
that's
get
the
it.
thing too, that I think we'll talk about later is punk is so singles driven that it was, it's hard. You got to remember, like, even though Black Flag doesn't put an album out till 1980, they're still, they've got a slew of singles out at this point. So and so much of even the post punk stuff that came out was very singles driven. But yeah. So anyway, that was what else came out that year.
To keep on the post-punk thing, we also have Gang of Four's Entertainment, right? I believe that's what that record's called. Yeah. What the guitarist just recently passed away.
But
really, that's like
amazing guitarist. And when you listen to Gang of Four, like it's completely out of time. Like it just doesn't. You could have made Gang of Four in any year, and it would be. You could have done any of those songs in any decade, and it would be like, this is bizarre. This this doesn't fit anything that I've known before. Like just the way that he used the guitar, almost like a drum. Like it's so percussive. And every aspect of the band is that percussive, and which I mean that's the origin of dance punk. That idea. Which going off of that tangent, you've also got Fear of Music by Talking Heads, which is just like a punk disco record. Yeah. It's just nonstop beat from the beginning.
XTC puts out, like, speaking of weird guitar sounds, XTC puts out Drums and Wires that year, right? Isn't that's with You're Only Making Plans for Nigel's on that record. It's got that weird, I've heard it described as angular guitar work, which, like, I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. That sounds about right. Yeah.
Yeah, in Public Image Limited put out the metal box. Wires got 154. Like, so, like, post-punk, like, UK punk was fully like, we're doing post-punk now. This is our thing. There are a handful of like more traditional punk, I guess, a lack of a better term. We have The Clash put out London Calling, and The Damned put out Machine Gun Etiquette, and Stiff Little Fingers put out Flammable Material. So like they're kind of keeping that like old guard sound going. But
dude from Stiff Little Fingers just passed away too, right? What's his name? Yeah, I think the singer from there. Like it seemed like yesterday, but it was probably like 4 months ago, 5 months ago. Yeah, I think during the pandemic. If I'm not mistaken. Hold on a sec. I love Stiff Little Fingers, and that album's great. It's got that. Have you heard the Peel sessions they did in support of that? Because they do a Johnny Was, because they do that Bob Marley cover of Johnny Was on that album. But in the Peel session version of Johnny Was, it's got like a 7-minute intro or something. It is fan-fucking-tastic, man. If you can hunt down the Stiff Little Fingers Peel sessions, it's amongst my favorite of the Peel sessions, which is a lot to say because the Peel sessions are really great, usually really great.
I think he's still alive. I haven't seen anything about him dying. Who am I thinking? There is someone who did just pass away there.
Was it the Buzzcocks? Was that the? I kind of. Sometimes
Shelley died in
last year,
like December of last year. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm losing it. Must have been Gang of Four then. I must have been just mistaken.
Yeah, he did. Yeah. Yeah, I don't think anybody else big from that time has like died within the last like 3 or 4 months. So I think we're okay there.
yeah.
I hope they all stay safe.
Pandemic ain't over, right? Sorry.
Right. Yeah, so it's like the Fall put out 2 records. They put out Live with the Witch Trials and Dragnet. Our friend of the show, Ann, is a big Fall fan, and like we always, anytime we see a Fall record, we have to call her out.
Nice.
But those records are excellent. Like this is the era of like the Fall that I really like, which I appreciate later Fall as well too. But like I like the more like raw sounding earlier stuff.
I go in and out with the Fall. Like there's a few bands that I'm like, I think I hate, like after a while listening to them, I'm like, I don't think I like them. And then 2 years go by and I'll hear some song and I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that. And then I'll check out some era that they, and the Fall's one of those bands where, I don't know, I find a lot of Fall fans are insufferable. And I tend to judge a lot of bands by their fan base sometimes where I'm just like, I can't hear one more fucking word about Frank Zappa. Can you just shut? Like the irony of Frank Zappa fans that they are making him the exact thing that he sought to destroy. They are idolaters that have turned him into this like icon that and everything that he was just looking to tear down, they've turned him into. So yeah, but and a lot of times I think I hate Frank Zappa, and then sometimes I'll hear some stuff I'm like, oh, that's not bad. But I think sometimes Zappa's doing a Zappa impression for Zappa fans, and I think other times he's doing what he wants. But that's my call. And dude, if you shit talk Frank Zappa, expect a lot of calls and comments on this. I'm sorry for everything you guys have to take.
Yeah, we're
direct all your hate mail to Jay Gonzo.
Yeah, there you go. Sure. Find me online. You can yell at me. And, like I don't like. There's a couple
I don't think
of bands
anybody
that,
here's a Zappa fan, so
yeah. It's like there's a lot of bands that like I can acknowledge their genius and just say they're not for me. Like I know that they are technically proficient and doing very interesting stuff, but fuck Rush. Like that's all I have to say. Again, you can come after me. It's just not for me. It's not. Anyway, sorry. We're talking about better music than that.
I did want to point out the Sex Pistols put out the Great Rock and Roll Swindle in that year. It's a soundtrack, sort of, I guess.
But it's got, some of the Sid Singh stuff is on there, right? Do they like My Way comes out on there? The head of Sid Singh's, and Sid Vicious is still alive at this point in time, right? Like he's not dead yet. Like in '79, he dies in he died early '80 or early '79? Shit, there's something
He died in '79. It was in February, actually.
Yeah, February record.
Okay. So he's just barely dead at this point. Yeah, have you seen Rites of Passage, DOA, that documentary, that punk documentary? John Holstrom does like the opening credits for it, the guy who founded Punk Magazine and stuff. So it's like a weird kind of mix of sensibilities of like American and English punks, and they follow the Sex Pistols in America, like during the tour they ended up breaking up in. Yeah. And so it's like these young kind of like goofy Sex Pistols just 3 months away from breaking up. They do an interview with Nancy and Sid where like Sid's nodding off because he's on drugs and Nancy's wearing this like see-through shirt, and they're just so gross and fucked up, but they're also children. Like he's 21 when he dies, you know what I mean? Like they're babies and they're just fucked up on heroin. And it's so sad because they're just talking about like the future, and you're just like, oh guys, like you're literally 6 months away from being dead, and all that, or like less than a year away. Yeah, it's a really good documentary to watch. Like it's called DOA, or Rites of Passage. It's got some other bullshit bands in there. I think they talked to Generation X, so Billy Idol's in it. Like pre Billy Idol on his own. I think there's some Damned in there if I'm not mistaken. And they have some other bullshit. It's like watching Decline of Western Civilization, where you're like, look at all these great bands, and then there's like Catholic Discipline. I'm like,
right.
Maybe not. Speaking of which,
band.
They spend a ton of time
I have the Bags band right here. I will go grab that shit. I'm going to be talking about them later. Fuck you, dismissing Alice Bags band. She is super important and very good. I actually have my VHS copy of of Decline. This used to be worth a lot of money because it didn't come out on video or on DVD for a really long time. But this is an OG VHS copy of Decline of the Western Civilization. But that's the same thing with DOA. There's some forgettable people in there that they thought were part of the scene are going to be important that are absolutely not. But there is a lot of cool talking to the Pistols and stuff. So yeah, hunt it down if you can check the documentary out.
Yeah, that kind of segues perfectly into our album. So we gave you the year 1979, and you selected the Germs GI. So I'm going to run through some basics about the record real quick. Released in October of 1979 on Slash Records. The personnel on this album is Darby Crash on vocals, Pat Smear on guitars, Lorna Doom on bass, and Don Bowles on drums. And the record was produced by Joan Jett.
Joan motherfucking Jett.
It is the first and only Germs full-length album, and by many it's considered one of the first hardcore punk records.
We're going to talk about that.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
So, first thing I ask everyone whenever they make their selection, why'd you pick this record?
The Germs are my favorite band, like hands down. They are everything I love about music, and they only exist for this one album, really. And there's 3 singles that come out. So they've got the Sex Boy Forming single that comes out. They do have What We Do Is Secret, which is also on this album. There's one more single that comes out. So they literally have this album plus 6 songs. And that's the entirety of their catalog. And when I was younger, I would have said, so let me give you a little personal history. So I hear the Germs in 1979, probably 1980, because this actually album came out late. And I grew up, so I'm born in 74. I'm 6 years old in 1980. I have an older sister. She's 4 years older than me. She had some friends that are 4 years older than her. So they're 13, 14-year-olds. And West Coast punk is primarily singles and tapes at this point, right? And they're getting passed around. And there's people much like rap who have heard the same compilation tapes. We're oh, is this song and that song? And and it was just tapes of tapes of tapes. And I remember being this is my moment when I realized that I have generational taste, a music that's for my generation, that's not my folks, because my parents are kind of typical 60s kids where they have, they're born in the 50s or my dad's born in 47, but they've got that kind of 60s taste in music, right? A lot of Crosby, Stills and Nash. My dad kind of leans a little more neo-folky, he's got some Kingston Trio in there, Peter, Paul and Mary. My mom's a little more pop, where she'll listen to the Beach Boys, but my dad will shit on the Beach Boys and the Association, right? My mom's got that pop sensibility, my dad's got a little more kind of edge to him. But I remember going as a 6-year-old kid going to hang out in this 2 doors down. There's this the garage of these Filipino neighbors that we had that had the older kids that were punks. One of them had a mohawk. I remember that. I love that. It's a guy named Jason Emanuel. So Jason Emanuel, if you're listening, dude, find me on the internet, dude, because he's the one who turned me on to punk. So we go in this garage and they play all this West Coast punk that's happening right at that time. And to set the stage, everyone's doing singles at this point. So I hear the Avengers are on there because I definitely heard "Fuck You" and "White," which I can't say. And I hear both those songs. I remember specifically hearing those songs because they make an impression. I remember hearing the Bags Band. A couple singles by the Bags or Alice Bags Band. "Fear" is on there, and I heard some Black Flag for sure. And this is before. This is Chavo era Black Flag, right? My personal favorite. And we can address the whole how Rollins ruined Black Flag later, but yeah, for sure. And I heard this music and I remember thinking this because I'd seen punks on TV, right? Because they're in an episode of Chips. And they're like, they show up as like
Quincy.
much like luchadors, they show up as like a punchline, you know. And then I'm like, oh, one of those Mohawk guys lives down the street from me. And then we went and hung out, and I heard the music he was listening to, and I'm like, oh man, this is great, and it's totally not for my folks, and I just loved it. And then later on in my life, like I would, you know, I come back to punk via metal, you know, later on as I get older. You know, like I get very pop focused for a while, and then I get into rap because it's very new. It has a very punk feel to it. And then metal just took over Southern California, and then thrash metal happens, which is amazing. Because I'm a big thrash metal fan, and you know, like Suicidal comes out, and DRI and DOA and those guys, like great thrash metal bands. And then via Suicidal, I kind of get back into like my punk roots. And then I remember like my friends having Germs records and be like, oh fuck, and I had heard Manimal for sure when I was a kid. And I, you know, we're listening to this album. We get to like, you know, what is it, like the A side? Isn't it like the third track on the A side, or no? It's like the 8th track on the album. So I'd listened to like 7 other songs, and it hits Manimal. I literally just like had this moment of recognition, like fuck, I remember this song, and just you know, borrowed it. I taped it, and then, you know, like maybe 4 or 5 years later, I see Decline of Western Civilization, and I like fuck, that's that band, you know. And I just, as time goes by, I just get more and more into the Germs, and you know, like being in LA and being punk at that time, like, you know, LA is a much different, we can talk about the hardcore thing. LA is a much different punk scene than the East Coast, right? Because it ostensibly starts in New York in quotation marks, but I would argue that punk is more affect of the Midwest than it is. A lot of the key players in New York are actually from the Midwest that just moved to New York and then found each other. You know, Rocket from the Tomb starts in Cleveland, right, and then goes, you know, that breaks up and becomes Perubu and the Dead Boys, and a lot of those guys like the Stooges and the MC5, like that's all Midwest, and it all just gets ported to New York. And I think even like David Johansen is he a New Yorker, right? Like the New York Dolls. Like I'm not so sure that he is, but
I don't know.
You know, punk starts there, and I think a lot of the hardcore that stems out of the East Coast is in response to what had happened in the New York scene. And I think a lot of kind of the misconceptions, like, because that second generation of punk, like by the time we get to like the Germs, we're talking about 78, 79, you know, so we're like 3 or 4 years removed from that first kind of initial like Ramones, Dead Boys, you know, and so that we have people who are now fans of punk making punk, right? And so a lot of the East Coast guys, I think, mistake the speed of punk for aggression as opposed to urgency, and they start kind of like getting angry. And I think a lot of East Coast hardcore is angry. It's like upset at the way things are, for sure. And they're also upset that it gets co-opted by England and becomes a fashion statement. So they need to kind of cleave themselves off from that by being like hardcore as opposed to being punk or being hardcore punk or whatever, however you want to distinguish it. But LA, West Coast punk stems out of weirdness. It literally starts with like the Weirdos, right? And the Screamers and bands that were like, you know, the Screamers never put an album out, and they're doing performance art. They're not fucking like, they're not a band. They're like the soundtrack to their performance art, as the Weirdos kind of are as well. And you know, like they're taking cues from like Rodney Bingenheimer's club and like glam shit that is all performative art. And so like, you know, the Germs are like, you know, Pat Schmier and Darby are like Zolar X, which is this weird kind of like American craft work that's a little more glammy, you know? And so they're all about like putting a show on, and fucking Darby Crash is for fuck sure about putting a show on, right? He's not even singing into the goddamn microphone. Like, you watch Decline of Western Civilization, and all it is Lorna Doone yelling at him to sing into the fucking mic. And he knows that it's not about the words that he's saying. So a lot of that, and the cool thing about LA punk is that that one of the things that starts in New York that gets lost really quickly is there's a really cool snottiness to punk, right? That's not aggressive. It's just kind of snotty. It's like, nah. You know, like, you know, it's like, oh yeah, like, you know, it's not even ironic yet. It's just like, oh, rock stars are all about being sexy, so I'm gonna like be there. I'm gonna be this skinny little thing up there, shaking my, you know, with my shirt off, pretending to be sexy when I know that I just look like I need a sandwich, and then I'm gonna fucking cut myself up because fuck your sexiness, you know, like, and there's a snottiness to that really gets embraced by LA or the West Coast, you know, even with like Jello Biafra and guys like that are just about being silly, that aren't afraid to like not be cool, that they want to be silly as a means to like dismantle cool. I think the West Coast or the East Coast gets obsessed with cool real quick because they're enamored with their stars that they like, and they want to emulate them and know all the cool stuff, right? to then appropriate it into their little cool band, and which is part of why I said before, which is why I think Rollins ruins Black Flag, because he's a fanboy. He's their biggest fan who got to be a member, and Ginn, who's an egomaniac, has his biggest fan as his singer, and it stops being about doing what they want and starting to be, let's do the punk thing. Because Rollins is a guy who understands the tenets of punk rock and trying to put them in there. So again, they start doing an imitation of themselves. Like, they're not doing what they want anymore. They're doing what they think they should do to be punk, and they start doing that. Let's do longer songs. Let's have long hair. Like, all of this becomes super calculated, which is why I think Rollins' biggest contributions are as an appreciator, as a critic. Like, his best work is spoken word, where he's like telling you all the tenets and all the facets of these scenes, and not necessarily manufacturing it, because all he's doing is collaging together all these elements. And I think the only person who's ever successfully done that, who's gone from being a professional appreciator to an actual creator, is Morrissey, and it only works because Johnny Marr's there. Because once he leaves there, once you lose like an actual creative, then it just becomes pastiche, which is what now Morrissey's doing, an impression of Morrissey, and it's morose for morose sake, and there's nothing to offset it or to temper it with anything, and Morrissey by himself is trash, right? So that is my argument for why Rollins, and this is also why the Rollins band doesn't do well. Like, it's okay. It's passable. He understands all the parts that make things cool, but he's not authentically cool, right? Like, he's not authentically, like, because he's making this pastiche. And so in art, when I talk to people who want art advice from me, and in every kind of art, so whatever, if you're a musician or if you're an artist, whenever I talk to other artists, I'm like, look, here's my number one bit of advice. Draw like you mean it. And when I see someone playing, I want them to play like they mean it, right? Like, I want, and Rollins is a guy who's playing like a punk and not playing like he means it. And I think that, I think that when Morris was there, he sounds like Proto Circle Jerks. And I think when Rollins is there, he sounds like Proto Rollins band. And I think when Dez is there, it's fucking terrible. And I think, dude, Machine is a terrible song. And anyone who says it's not is kidding them. And I think when Chavo's there, he was just there to be there. And it was so unformed and so passionate and so authentic that they played like they meant it, Like, they lose Robo to the Misfits, and then they replace, and then they lose Chavo for, a string of other singers, and then ultimately fucking Ginn replaces him with a fanboy. That had to go badly, right? I mean, like, listen to Get in the Van. He talks about how much he fucking loved him and how stoked he was and scared of them. How is anything good going to come of that? It's that movie Rockstar, like, it's just going to be lame. It's just a fucking, it's like Journey, So anyway.
It doesn't help that Greg Ginn is like a straight up just awful person.
Yeah. And he found a dude to suck his dick in his own band. Like that. And the rest of them he just starts filling in slots that can be serviceable. I mean, I listened to you talk about the Slip It In album, and even Kira is like, what are we doing here? She's not passionately involved in anything. She's filling the role of bass player. Like, I think Robo wanted to be there until the Misfits make him a better offer. It's at some point, it's just a bunch of people that are hired guns that are servicing Greg Ginn's ego, and the Greg Ginn band sucks, and that's from fucking Damaged. I think there's enough fallout from the volition of their singles going up into Damaged that can kind of gives Damaged like a pass, but after that it's just downhill. After that it's just this it's like someone who heard about Black Flag doing Black Flag songs, and so. When I was a kid, I would have said Black Flag was my favorite band until I realized that I only like them until their albums actually start coming out, Right. I love fucking Jealous Again. I love, there's so many good songs. I've got the first 4 years, and I have Damaged in my record collection, but like the first 4 years I stopped listening to when Dez comes on board. I can't get past it. And then at some point I realized the fucking Germs are the better version of Black Flag. They never got to, I mean, dude, I'm going to pretend that the bullshit going on up until Lorna died never happened. The Germs die with Darby. that Shane West kid, fuck that guy. Like, he's never going to be Darby. But
that's weird. Like, I get that they were like, he played him in the movie. He's kind of like a good. If you were ever going to do that, that would be the thing to do, is to get someone who's like playing him to do it. But at the same time, it's an actor playing Darby on stage this time instead of like in a movie.
Yeah, it's a cover band weird. At that point.
Yeah.
Right? Like, they're their own cover band. I don't get, but up until Darby dies, GI and the singles that come with it, and we should talk about GI for just 1 second. The reason that it's GI, it's just the letter G, the letter I, in quotation marks. That's how they had to build themselves at shows, and it stood because people, club owners who had heard of them, knew that their fan base was so disruptive and destructive that they stopped booking the Germs or it's actually just Germs. It's not the Germs, but they stopped booking Germs because they were fucking trouble. And the Germs are like, well, we got to get money. We got to make, we got to play. So they create this band GI, Germs Incognito, to then get booked and trick club owners into booking them again. And so they call their first album their little code name GI and that, to me, that's fucking punk, right? Like they have the punk ethos so fucking like internalized that they don't ever think about it, Like if I would venture to guess, if you asked them if they were a punk band, they're like, oh, we're just a band. Like, they were just doing what they were doing, and it was the punkest thing on the fucking planet. And this one album is before hardcore gets codified and becomes the chanty kind of bro thing that it ultimately becomes, and the kind of testosterone fest. And it still kind of rides that line between like kind of codified genres of punk start to really cleave themselves. And these guys are fans of things that aren't punk primarily because there's not enough punk to like for them to be fans of. Like they're listening to glam bands and they're listening to like, and I think that like a lot of that East Coast stuff is predicated on a lot of like Lenny K's Nuggets kind of stuff, like those kind of garage bandy stuff. And I think that West Coast punk definitely takes it. I mean, we do have like Chris Montez and things like Let's Dance, like really kind of, we do have some great garage hits, but it's not as much as the Midwest or the East Coast. So ours is West Coast punk, because I'm from LA, so like I should probably talk, like when I say ours, I mean, so like LA punk kind of, West Coast punk stems from a lot of weirdness, and I think that weirdness really makes it its own, it's a unique animal, and why when people say LA hardcore or West Coast hardcore, I really bristle at it, because it affixes it to a thing that it never really was attached to. It just sort of sounded that way. And there's tracks on here that are for sure, fetishized by the hardcore people. Like, they'll point to Lexicon Devil because it's got that fucking chanty part, the gimme gimmes are in it,
Yeah.
That's everything fucking those hardcore sleeveless bros want in their life, But it's like, it's such a weird blip on this entire album that it's almost not worth noting as this kind of ground zero for a thing that they were never a part of, because Darby's gone before it ever even happens. And it's why I love this fucking album, man. Because it definitely goes in a lot of weird directions that the people who laud it as ground zero for the thing that they love would fucking hate. And that's what I love about it.
Well, it's interesting. The Germs, I should say.
Yeah.
What they do a lot of stuff on this record that is more the predecessor for noise rock than it is hardcore. I mean, yeah, there's Lexicon Devil, yeah, there's Media Blitz. I mean, there are like, fist pumping, kind of, that idea of punk, but there's just a lot of feedback and sonic exploration, and that it's funny. I mean, obviously they weren't in New York, they weren't part of the no wave scene, but so much of this record is what Sonic Youth would do, what plenty of other bands would do that are associated with a more intellectual, and Germs are just like scuzzy LA freaks. Like, they're just I raw remember, and dirty. And
so like my personal take on that, like you listen to my personal favorite album or a song on this album, when I asked you to put it on the music when you intro the album, is Manimal. And it just has that great line of like, I came into this world a puzzled panther. And that, to me, the word puzzled panther sums them up so fucking perfectly, right? They're confused in a way that lacks focus, right? Like they're fucking just mad at everything or disaffected by everything. It's not any like the government sucks or police suck or this, or it's just like fucking things are just sucky, like in general, like I don't, in vague directions. Like, he's queer in a time when you can't come out, and they're like, a lot of homeless kids are part of the scene that are just been ejected. I mean, the woman who directs Decline of Western Civilization goes on to make Suburbia like a few years later, and it talks about those like homeless kids that just get booted, like just disposable children, where they're just like, I can't deal with your drugs, your music, your attitude, your sexuality, like just they've been abandoned by society, and this is like Carter era America, where we've just got that malaise going on, right, where everyone's just like nothing's moving forward, and here's this young vital generation that has no place to go. Like literally, like fucking your old man's not going to quit his job, so you're not getting that factory entry level job. You're not, and the world is fucking changing. We're like, yeah, man, my grandfather who got out of the Navy and got a job on the loading docks of a paper factory, bought a house and retired there. You know what I mean? Like in LA, like he lived in Montebello. He bought a house in LA, working he wasn't the manager at the paper factory docks. He just worked there, owned a home. And then our generation, they're like, yeah, that's never going to happen. Like, we just broke the whole fucking economy. You're never going to have that. So all the things, like, all that American dream, all the promise of post-war America, that's kind of not here for you. Good luck. Then they offer no solutions. And so an entire disaffected generation is young and has energy and has no place to put it. And then is just getting cast out to figure life out on their own because they can't deal with, like, the way that they're going to express their sexuality or their identity in any way, shape, or form. They're just like, yeah, just get the fuck out of my house and figure it out. And so this kind of cloisters of disaffected, like isolated youth that don't have life skills just figure out this kind of lifestyle that resonates with who they are. And it's cacophonous and it's noisy and it's jittery and it's jangly and it's everything that they're feeling at the time, which is why it resonates with that generation, which is also why I hate it when someone just puts that on as a show to, like, oh, I know what these kids like, and does that because it's not authentic, man. And these guys were definitely authentic. I love Manimal for that reason, that it just comes right out, and it also has that, the puzzle part is very important, but the Panther part is also important because there's a power and a ferocity in that, right? Like, it's like I'm young and strong and dangerous and undirected, completely unfocused, and that's the way the song kind of happens, right?
I'm glad you mentioned Manimal specifically because when I was listening to that one, I noticed I felt a really strong Stooges influence on that song specifically. Yeah. Like, I'm wondering if that Puzzle Panther was also kind of like a him kind of throwing back to like a Streetwalking Cheetah, like, getting like the big cat, vibe. And then it has like a Stooges vibe to it.
Oh, for sure. It inverts like the kind of chorus verse structure where the chorus is basically the same thing every time. And then the verses are the same thing every time, but then the chorus, the response to that is what varies. Like the chorus is different every time. So again, that's like this punk kind of inversion, and I think it's just a thing that came to them naturally. You know what I mean? Like I don't think they thought like, oh, I'm going to subvert the entire verse chorus structure of rock and roll. They were just like, no, we want to do it this way. But I think that's the thing that the Stooges would do, though. So sorry, go ahead.
I don't think they were like, yeah, we're going to subvert this whole thing. They probably weren't going to do that because they couldn't play their instruments when they started. So I don't know that like they could even like formulate at that point. They were one of those bands that was getting better as they went along. Like, and like up to this point, people had only seen them live for the most part. There were a couple singles, but
yeah, and even the singles, we should point out, like the Forming is it's a live take. It's like a live take. It's not. It's done on 2-track in a garage as they performed it. Like it's so, dude. Forming is such like that to me. That's why I love Manimal, but also like you listen to Forming and you're like that right there. That's what punk is. Everything else is trying to be this. It's 2-track in a garage played live with nothing but enthusiasm and no talent. So
So this was them, like, no one had heard them recorded really like this before, like full on studio setting. Like, so whenever people heard it for the first time, like, oh shit, they're actually good. Like, instead of just like being like something in the live moment that's like really cool, like hearing it recorded was like the first time people could really hear him singing, because he wouldn't sing into the mic. Pat's guitar is amazing on a lot of these tracks. Like, I didn't expect to hear some of the guitar lines on this record. It had been a really long time since I listened to this album.
I'm sorry, the riff on Richie Dagger's Crime is it's like one of the best riffs in punk rock ever, and it's something that every other LA band starts to emulate. Like a little slide on like the 9th fret at the end of the riff that punctuates it. It gets like, you can hear that in every Black Flag song after. You can hear it in every fucking Fear song after. You can hear it in every Alice Bags song after that. Like, they fucking Pat Smear. There's a reason why the Nirvana snatched him up when he was, kind of well past his prime, and the Foo Fighters picked him up. He's way more underappreciated than even a guy like Billy Zoom that kind of like, people know to know. And there's another LA band we didn't talk about too. Was X is out there. They've got in this time in '79 they've got like 2 or 3 singles out. Los Angeles doesn't happen. It also comes out through Slash, right? It doesn't, Slash, but it doesn't happen until 1980, right? So we're still a year away from X. But they're around too. It's
funny because they are a weird band too. Like, they're playing like this weird combination of like rockabilly country with punk at a time where it's like UK was really the only punk, and New York like is kind of all you had.
And rockabilly, anything that kind of hinged on country was the antithesis of punk. I mean, like, you look at the Cuckoo's Nest incidents that was next to the country bar, and how those guys would fight. That gets memorialized in the Vandals' Pat Brown, right? Like, I mean, the Cuckoo's Nest is infamous for being like where country budded up against punk, and the two did not get along. So to play any kind of like slide guitar shit in your punk rock song is a little dangerous. But they did have the benefit of Ray Manzarek producing their music, who could kind of soften their tone. But
I'm glad.
I was
gonna say with Slash, they put out the X record, but they also put out a couple other LA bands. They put out the Blasters, Fears record, but they're also
Lobos, right at some point.
Los Lobos. That's where I was going. Lobos, Faith No More, and the Violent Femmes. They put out the first Violent Femmes record.
Yeah,
which
Slash
is crazy.
No joke, man. And we should also say that the first, or I shouldn't also. I would like to say that the first, I think, couple singles from Germs comes out through Bump, which is another kind of like key player in the singles, starting the fire of West Coast punk. So they put out a lot of really good bands.
What is Fresh Fruit? Is that 77? 78?
I think it's like 79, isn't it?
Is it that late? No,
yeah,
I'm thinking
it's late. They get a late start, as I recall. So hold on, I'm gonna look it up. You keep talking.
Yeah, I guess like Dead Kennedys were kind of the other.
Came out in 80.
Yeah,
it was 80. Okay.
They seem like a band that was like essential to the formation of it. But I always remember that they're late to the party. I mean, not like late to, but they definitely do.
They just start when.
Like they're post Avengers, right? Like the Avengers, I think, aren't even a band by the time that the Kennedys are a band. And to me, when it comes to Bay Area bands, like the Avengers will always win. Their cover of Painted Black is fucking sublime.
Looking at the history of this record, I was looking at the producer, and they had originally wanted Mark Lindsay from Paul Revere and the Raiders to produce the record, but he was too expensive, so they got Joan Jett instead. It's just so funny to be like, oh man, we can't get the dude from Paul Revere. Well, I guess we'll just have to settle for this future legendary musician.
Yeah, but they don't know that because they're coming off of ostensibly she's a former member of a one-hit wonder band, right?
Yeah.
They really only have Cherry Bomb with, and it's not until later that people go back and discover the rest of their catalog. But the
Runaway first record comes out in 80, I think.
Yeah. And she does that Arrows cover that kind of catapults her into fame. But she I can see that like someone good from a one-hit wonder band, like the Runaways are weird in that they produced like two really kind of mega stars, in very different genres. Mm-hmm. But again, it's like people adjacent to some really good work. It's like the Phil Jackson effect, right? Like if Phil Jackson had been a better player, he probably wouldn't have been as good a coach, because he'd be out there he would his only advice would be like, I don't know, go do what I do. But him having been someone who kind of was on the bench long enough to see what makes it good, was allowed to take that knowledge and refine it and become like one of the best NBA coaches ever. I think Joan Jett having the success of the Runaways and Cherry Bomb and doing the tour and stuff, and then not having to do a follow-up record and tour that, and the toil that kind of would wear on her, she got to then kind of do her own thing. It's the same with like Manzarek and X, right? Like he comes out and he gets to he's not the driving force of the Doors, but he's around it enough to know. I mean, he writes a lot of their music, but he's not burdened with being Jim, right? He gets to kind of learn enough to then translate that into helping other people. It's the same thing with John Cale. He comes out of the Velvet Underground and he goes and he produces that first Modern Lovers record. It's like there's a lot of people who aren't the front man and aren't the center of attention in successful things that are allowed to kind of come out and then produce and help foster an environment for creative endeavors, right? Because no one else is going to bring out, like, can you imagine if the guy from Paul Revere and the Raiders had produced the Germs, like how clean he would have wanted those vocals to be, and how he's from a mindset where the technology had just gotten good enough to make things sound good, so he's going to want them to be as clean as possible. Joan Jett's post clean, she knows that dirty sounds better, and she's going to keep it as dirty as possible. Right, it's like my comic book, man. Like I go to great lengths to make it look shitty and old because clean and crisp, like with the Kirby art, it's just gonna look not right. Right, there's character in the flaws, and she knows that.
Yeah, so, she was also their friend too, so she would have seen them live a bunch of times, I'm sure. And I do think it's really funny that she comes out of this, and also Belinda Carlisle comes out of this same scene too.
Drummer for a hot minute, yeah.
well,
the early Go-Go's are very punk.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love the Go-Go's. Like the first two Go-Go's records are amazing. My taste in music ranges pretty widely, so like I'm not limited to like a certain era of like punk or anything in specific, but yeah, like Belinda Carlisle, Joan Jett, and the Germs are all like tied together very closely.
Got television, got supervision, no shit for you. Media blitz, media history. Don't steal eyes on TV screen. Can you realize what we've seen? Taking a jet from a mad machine. Don't be big through green lines or vision when you don't see signs. You play part of the mastermind. We do signs, we do right. We play by idle time. We're government based on social content to watch the idle rhyme. Got television.
I love the story of them responding to an ad for, it was Belinda and Lorna responded to the ad looking for two untalented females. It's crazy that Lorna had no, I mean, to my understanding, from what I've read, she had no prior musical experience.
She'd never picked up a guitar.
And she's one of the coolest punk bass players I've ever heard. Like, the parts that she plays on this record they punch through everything. Like, there's just this record the driving force.
This record has some really good production on it and arrangement on it, where when it's at its best, all of the parts are working kind of independently but complement each other. So the bass line isn't following the drums and it's not following the lead guitar, but it's kind of like a good Elvis Costello song where it's just weaving in and out, where it'll sync up at the right points to kind of add punctuation to bits, but then it kind of it gets a little wandery for places, and they'll turn up the mix on it at points. And I think what is it on Richie Dagger's Crime? It definitely does that, and I definitely have notes here for in Manimal it does that as well. But there is a section of this record. There's 3 songs in a row that are just kind of standard Germs songs, and I think it's easy to dismiss them. And it's like Let's Pretend, Dragon Lady, and The Slave just kind of do the same thing.
Yeah.
And they're not really but there's so much good stuff on here that it's hard to say that this album, that it suffers from it. They're not bad, they're just not inspired, and there are songs in which the vocals will follow the rhythm of the guitar. They'll be like very kind of like there's a sameness to it, where it's like everyone's kind of like doing that hardcore thing, where everything's just like, all coming out. But at its best, it's like everyone's barely on beat and sort of in sync, and they just sort of rise and fall at the right exact moments. And I gotta believe that that's like Joan Jett's doing, because a lot of it is mixed too, where it's just like, we'll just turn down the bass where she's really wandering far, but we'll turn it back up where she really comes in and punctuates the sentiment of this. And the overall thing that I love about this album is that it is it's emotionally distilled, right? There's no journey in any one of these songs, right? The confused song is about being confused and doesn't resolve with clarity. The angry song is about being angry, and the love song, the one song that they do, which is which I wrote this down. They do a very kind of the newest one where it's an anti-love song. He's not talking about you're the one. He's just like you're the newest one. You know, like you're the one that's here now, and there's gonna be one later because I'm young. You know, like why would I think that you're, you know? But it is this kind of like honest, earnest attempt at like a '60s love song that would be like, oh baby, you're the only one for me, but it's saying, oh baby, you're the one for right now, and there's gonna be more later. It's like kind of there's a disclaimer to it almost. But yeah, man, it's just about that. Like it never resolves to like, you know, dismiss the girl or fully accept her or whatever, or person I should say, because he is, you know, Darby was bi or queer to a degree. I mean, most say bi, but some think he was just gay and kind of playing a part. Anyway, that's not for me to decide. But it is good to know that it's just like it's a queer love song that's about Mr. Right Now and not Mr. Right. And it's very pure in its emotionality. Like every one of these is about a single thing for 2.5 to 7 minutes or whatever. You know, there are some longer songs on here, and they and then they're done, and there's no journey, right? We don't start angry and get happy. We don't start happy and get sad. We don't start horny and get resolved. Like it's all just the thing it is, purely for that moment of songs. And the honestness of that earnestness is really powerful, man. I think, you know, and that to me is punk. It's short, quick, distilled, single encapsulations of moments, as opposed to like any kind of journey you might want to take. Because punk exists in opposition to prog rock, where these guys have movements and themes. You know, it's like none of that, man. You know, like that we're not about. I mean, the closest that they get to a theme is they have. Hold on, what was I made notes on this, man. They have a lot of everything kind of drives down. Like everything, like they do a lot of kind of call and response guitar riffs, and it's always driving down. Where it's like the first riff is like da da da, and then da da da. You know, like it's always like this, then that. It's like the lower thing, and everything. Like a lot of their choruses drive, like tonally, they drive downward, and that's a signature. And they introduced that from What We Do Secret, from the first little 45-second song you get in the beginning, and that's the only thing that thematically. But I think it's just how they wrote. I mean, like I have to assume they weren't thinking like, oh, this will all revolve around the theme of downward progression. Like, no, it's just how they thought of things. It's like, it's everything, and I think it's kind of how like they were feeling, because everything was kind of like stated as bright and then brought down a level to reality. You know what I mean? Because that's the world they grew up in. American dream, but not for you. You know? It's like,
did y'all catch the on what is it? We Must Bleed. That the intro riff, like that Black Flag would just rip off for Rise Above.
Oh fuck yeah, right, dude. There's a song on here that they do that's like, hey, what if we were Black Flag? It's I literally Strange Notes. Literally is like, oh, what if we did a Black Flag song? And then they follow it up with American Leather, which is just starts off completely cacophonous, right? Like it's just noise from the beginning. So it's like they're like, hey, what if we were this other band? And then they're like, no, we're not that fucking band. Like their answer, like again, it's that asked and answered where it's like, hey, what if we were this? No, we're not fucking that. Not at all. Yeah, I totally. There's a lot of songs on here that are a little proto other bands, but they instantly, like the next song is always like, nah, we're not that guy. We're this fucking thing. And I love that about it. Again, it's that snottiness of West Coast punk where it's like, we're not what you think we are. You know, it's like, you think you got us pegged, we're not. But not in a shitty way, not like a fuck you, we're not what you think you are. Yeah. It's just like, man, just do whatever, because you don't give a shit anyway. You don't like this guy, you don't like that guy. What does it matter? I'll be both of them. Fuck you. You know, so.
I will say I hate the last track.
That loose jazzy kind of, it's fully 100%. Does anyone in this room think that they wrote lyrics to that song?
It's a live track, right? Like it's live.
I think, yeah. But so the reason I love it, let me defend it, and you're fully welcome to hate it. Yeah. If you listen to like live recordings of them, and there's a lot of them out there, so they do put a live record out post Darby's death, and there's a lot of like live aspects to a lot of what they do. And the best thing about those is how they encapsulate what it's like to be at a Germs show, because it's antagonistic. He's like fighting with people, he's yelling at people to shut the fuck up. He's telling you shut the fuck up, and he's fucked up most of the time. You can just hear, like, I love Darby's voice, like those fucked up teeth of his, and his like heroin slur. And he's just like kind of like a little effeminate, you know what I mean? But he's also like a tough. Like I would not want to fight Darby Crash. He would fucking kill me. That guy has been in more street fights than I'm sure you could count on both hands. But he's just like, you know, and to me it just has that kind of like fucked up Darby's doing Darby's thing where everyone's just doing this kind of like what is that? bitchin' Camaro kind of like riff in the background, or just like like, and he's just talking about how his mom and dad brought him a car for from the Bahamas, and like this is pre bitchin' Camaro, but it's way more fucked up and dark because he name checks Joan Jett in it, and it's just stream of consciousness, and he's fucking geeked out on heroin, and he's just to me this is what it's like to see a Germs show where Darby's not together, you know what I mean? And I think that there's an honesty to it that I love. In how it's just going to be wandery and it just unravels at the end, right? Like, it doesn't end. It's just like people stop playing, like the guitars fade out and the bass fades out and the drums still kind of tinkling on some cymbals and shit. And to me, that's just such a distillation of who they were as people and as a band that I appreciate it. Now, am I going to put it on because I need to like hype myself up for something? Like, I'm going to the gym today. I need to listen to, I'm like, probably not. But to me, it's important that it's there more than it's good that it's there.
Dylan, you were going to say something.
It's speaking of Black Flag. It's funny you mentioned Strange Notes being like, let's do a Black Flag song. I feel like there's a lot of Black Flag songs that are, let's do Annihilation Man. Let's do Shut Down Annihilation Man from the Germs, like the B side of My War. Like it's just wandering, sludgy.
Yeah, I have that note. It's like, this is what told Greg Ginn that he could do this for like half the later Black Flag records.
Yeah, we'll do 4 songs on side 1, and then side B is going to be, 1 song.
It kind of reminded me too. Isn't there like a recording of like Black Flag doing Louie Louie for like forever? Oh, yeah. And
yeah,
which Louie Louie, speaking of, Paul Revere and the Raiders do a version of Louie Louie. It was one of their singles. So I wonder too, I don't know why punks loved Louie Louie so much.
I think Louie Louie was a garage rock hit. Like it was a record that should not have had pop success because if you listen to it, it sounds like garbage.
Yeah. It's produced poorly. It's 2 chords. You don't really need to know how to play it. And I think that's part of like, it's why everyone learns Gloria, right? Like it's 3 chords. It's like, it's not hard to play. Everyone, and I think that kind of earnestness of early garage rock where their ambition exceeds their talent and equipment is something that like I love old 60s garage rock. I mean, like Chris Montez's Let's Dance is a fantastic example of that. And I did an episode of another podcast a long time ago where we just went down like kind of psychedelic 60s garage rock, and we talk about like Question Mark and the Mysterians and again, those are guys who should never have put full albums out, right? Like there's no reason, like everything about Question Mark and the Mysterians that's great is in 96 Tears, and just move on. You know what I mean? Like, and to me, that's part of what I love about the Germs is that they just do this one album. 3 of the 17 or 16 tracks are kind of disposable, so they really just have like 12 to 15 good songs, great songs at that. But the ones that are great, man, everything I need to know about them is in Manimal. It's in Lexicon Devil. It's in Richie Dagger's Crime. And to me, like, honestly, I kind of get annoyed. Like, I like Lexicon Devil, but I just get annoyed at like that it launched 1,000 bro bands of hardcore. I'm just, I try to not blame them for it. They had no idea, but I definitely am just like, this fucking song. But it's also like, there's plenty of like, Black Flag songs that are like that, or there's, a Circle Jerk song. There's plenty of punk anthems that I'm just like, oh Jesus, this fucking thing, But
this is like the punk anthem. This and Media Blitz, I think, are like the 2 that are like the most well known outside of the record, like that live on their own, I think. Because I definitely remember hearing Media Blitz before I heard any other Germs song. And it even reminds me of kind of what like the New York style hardcore would do with their version of hardcore, especially like his vocal take is real low on that song.
Yeah, yeah.
Like a weird like punchy sort of style that even what's his name from Agnostic Front would kind of do that thing that he does on Media Blitz. But it also has, I guess, a little bit of Dead Boys vibe too.
So, it definitely reminds me a lot of Dead Boys, but I mean, again, the Dead Boys influenced a lot of hardcore in a way that they probably didn't necessarily intend.
Yeah, the Dead Boys are a band that understood the snottiness of that too. Like I love like just their Stiff Vaders and Cheetah Chrome, like those guys, because they're they're Midwest kids, so they're growing up in a place where just being that kind of weird, just being was kind of like outcasting, right? Like it wasn't even what they were doing; it's just who they were. And then they're like, we got to get to like where the rest of the weirdos are, and they go to they go out to New York and start a scene out there. But yeah, I think that initial kind of wave of snottiness from like the New York Dolls and because even Johnny Thunders leaves there, and that first his first Heartbreakers, like the LAMF album, still has a lot of that great kind of snottiness to it. But by the time you get to the train wreck that is So Alone, it's like everyone kind of like, again, they're doing imitations of themselves. I mean, So Alone is an album that on paper should be fucking great, right? It's got Phil Lynott on it, from Thin Lizzy. It's got Chrissie Hynde on it. It's got Paul Cook and Steve Jones from the Sex Pistols, like, post breakup of the Pistols doing it. And it just, everyone's giving what they think people want from them, and no one's doing what they want to do, and it just falls flat. And that snottiness gets lost, right? And I'm sure a lot of it just, like, all the money from it probably just went to drugs, and they're all a little fucked up. I think Steve Jones has said as much, but it's but yeah, there's a lot of people who after a few years start doing imitations of themselves. The fucking Ramones do it, There's a period of Ramones where they're just doing the Ramones, and they lose that authenticity. And I just love that Darby and the Germs just don't do that. They don't have the opportunity to do that.
Yeah.
And this one record exists as this perfect moment. It's like this always makes me think of what a fucking Screamers album would have been, right? Like if they had just gotten in the studio, and if Tomato Duplanty had the opportunity to play with the knobs and shit, and I think some of this, like some of the things they do on here, like in what's it called? Hold on. They add a little radio media blitz. Yeah, shit, what I'm talking about. Yeah. They add little like radio bits in there and stuff, and like I can't imagine what Tomato Duplanty would have done if he had access to a studio and been able to start like twisting knobs around and doing weird shit. Their one album would have been fucking amazing, but unfortunately they don't have it, and
right.
This is as close as I get to that.
I went because I was reading in like somewhere reading about how like Darby borrowed his like vocal stylings from the lead singer of the Screamers, and I was like, oh, well, I gotta go see what this sounds like for reference. And then the first song I heard, it was like one from like Live at Target, like a lot of live shows happen there. I even forget the name of the song. It has like a number in it. And it's just like,
yeah. Vertigo is usually the one that most people find first.
Right.
But.
This one had like I gotta pull it up because that song was amazing, and I was like, well, I gotta go find an album by them, and then there's nothing. They have no albums.
They had a great metallic sound to their guitar too. It just sounded like it was like a little bit of metallic distortion on it. So yeah, I don't know how they got that live.
I have to find this specific song title because 122 Hours of Fear, Live at Target. Yes. Go watch that if you've never seen it, because I just watched it for the first time this week, and I was like, this band should have had something, because they were doing the more like arty stuff like you'd see Devo do, and like even looks a little like Danny Elfman too. Like,
yeah, right. He looks like Evil Ed from Fright Night. Like that's who I always think of him. Yeah, whatever that guy's name is. So,
yeah. That I was like, man, I would love to hear more of these songs, and I did watch the Vertigo song, and it was really good. There is like an album, and I don't know how it's produced, and it might even be bootleg, because I think the printing's like really kind of fuzzy on one side of it, like it's one of those things like I've got a great Sonics compilation album, and it just looks so bootleg, like the printing's not great on it. I'm like, this can't be legit, but the recordings are fantastic. So there is a Screamers album out there, and you can get Screamers on vinyl. I mean, I could grab it for you if you really want to know what it's called, but or I can email it to you later. Yeah,
yeah.
There's some stuff online, but not a lot.
Yeah, the vinyl's pretty good. I picked it up at Amoeba, so it's at least legit enough to be at Amoeba Records. But it's much like the Germs, that there's so little out there that someone had a Walkman taping this at a show, but it's like no one's heard them do this song, or this is the only time this ever got performed, and so it ends up getting out there in the world. And part of me like digs that. It's like that comic artist Fletcher Hanks, right? Like he was just such a weird mystery that existed for such a short amount of time that you think you know it all, and then someone's like, oh wait, he did this thing, and oh here someone found this in this weird old back issue that no one ever thought about. So it's harder to discover music that way, but it is out there. There's enough. Who knows if the board op at some show decided to hit record that night and forgot that he had it for 40 years.
Yeah, there's got to be like a tape or something, or like a reel somewhere, just of oh yeah, I have this, and they never did anything with it. They never took it to anyone who could have maybe like, well shit, this is a great recording. We could have put this on a record, or at least a CD of some sort.
But part of me thinks that punk needs to not exist on tape, on record. You know what I mean? Like, because sometimes it's just about the moment. It's just about like how and that's really what it was about. Was about people just being together and doing the and how the audience is much a part of the band as the band is, at the people on stage, right? The punk, especially as a movement, is so much more about like the original, like the English thing is as much about the Bromley contingent as it is about the Sex Pistols, right? And the same, there were so few of us back then that we all knew each other. You might not know someone's name, but oh, that's the guy with the big patch on his back of X, Y, or Z. Like whatever. It's like, how many people do you just know like that, right? Like you don't know their name or who they are. They're just the guy you see at the certain thing. Like there's a ton of like comic book people that are like that. Like I don't know that fucking guy's name, but I know he's the guy with the whatever shirt I see every year. Oh, that's the guy with the Bean World tattoo. I know that guy. Like I don't know his fucking name, but I know he's the guy with the Bean World tattoo. So that and I think that punk is about those moments more than it's about the songs, and the songs kind of serve the moment as opposed to the other way around. And so sometimes it's almost better that it's just, oh man, I was there the night the Waters Club came down, or I was there the night that, this happened or that happened, that the fire was started out back of that one show, but how, and you just know that you and those 400 people are the only people who remember the dumb little details of that night, the how the firemen had to break that guy's window to get to the fire hydrant or whatever, it's like, yeah, and those are the punker of the moments than the actual songs or the band T-shirt that I got or the music. That music was just the soundtrack to the weird shit that happened in my life. And so maybe the clarity of having it on vinyl doesn't need to be there, but I am glad I do have these tracks from Germs on vinyl, or I had them on vinyl. Now I have to listen to them online. It got warped in my move to Arizona.
Yeah, that was a weird thing too. Like we went looking for the album on because Spotify has everything. I mean, for better or worse, Spotify is what it is, but it's a useful tool for people. But yeah, GI's not on Spotify. There's like 2 live records that are on there. And apparently it used to be on there, but now it's not. It may be a licensing issue. Warner supposedly owns the Slash catalog.
Yeah. Warner bought Slash. They put out like a box set, and then they've done some record store days. Like I have my What We Do Is Secret record store day from like 2 or 3 years ago, and they did another one that's blue with the white, or sorry, black with the blue Germs on it.
Yeah.
And I couldn't get that one, like it was sold out before I got there. But yeah, it comes out in dribs and drabs. But it seems to me they have that primary box set that's like $300 that has everything, right, on vinyl and on CD. And I think that the reason they keep it off of things like Spotify is because they know guys like you and I who want Germs are maybe willing to pay $300 to own all of it. It's a sickness.
They are one of those bands too that it's like they have one true record. So it's like if it's on Spotify, nobody's gonna go buy anything else Germs related unless
it's not driving sales.
Yeah,
for sure.
Like the super fan isn't necessarily the one driving the numbers. So
yeah. It's unfortunate, but I do again. I kind of like that it's this like secret handshake. Like I love when I have like a Germs T-shirt on, and it's just the circle, with the GI on there, and it's such a secret handshake, man. Because you walk around with that, and people who know fucking know, and then everyone else is just like, oh, it's a circle. Like they can't look at your shirt and like, oh, what's that? Like I'm wearing a Venomous Pink shirt right now, and people can go like, oh, what are the Venomous Pinks? I'm like, oh, this is cool.
I got my Soviets T-shirt on.
Yeah, right. Like you can have a conversation. Like people can ask you or go home and Google search it if they want.
Yeah.
You've got a circle and GI on your shirt. You can't Google that shit, right? You're like, what is this? Like, you're going to Google search circle GI? Like, is that going to come up?
I mean, maybe. Yeah, I bet at this point you probably would get that.
Yeah, you might be able. Enough people have asked the question, like, what the hell is that band? But I do love the Secret Handshake album aspect of it, and I do love that it is a thing that if someone notices my shirt, I know we can talk for a while about a thing,
Yeah. Yeah, that cover is it's iconic. Like it's just and it's so simple and clean. Like who was it? Darby who did it? Who came up with the art for
I don't
it?
know. I wanted to, I was gonna look into that because it is like one of the more iconic. That just a circle, man. Like it's fucking like who does that? Who thinks about that as their logo? But again, that's the most punk thing ever. Just it's the blue circle.
Yeah, I mean, and it is theirs. Like no one else has that.
It's that specific shade of blue, and it's like the thickness of the circle. It's like all of it, kind of comes together to, as a graphic designer, it's like, it's fucking beautiful. Like,
those lines right above and like at the top and the tiny little Germs.
And that might have been, them trying to emulate like Factory Records at that point, because Factory has a really clean design like that too, where they just have like the number on there, that little block of text that they put out. It's all Helvetica, So, I think that was a time in the ethos where people were just like the kind of collective ethos of not wanting these, needing it to be about your band, like, oh, this needs to sum up who we are as a band on the cover. We don't need the airbrushed, barbarians on the cover of what we're doing. Which, airbrushed barbarians, it's a time and place for that. But I love Zeta as much as the next guy. I just don't necessarily need it on all my album covers. And they do have a whole bunch of like, I think some of their singles had that kind of leather daddy skeleton busting through the the paper kind of thing. Like they do partake of some kind of like punk rocky tropes, you know. You're kind of like more TSOL kind of aesthetic, but in my head they're always just that clean circle with the GI in parentheses.
Yeah, I tried to pull up like who did the cover. I don't know.
It was Darby.
It was Darby. Okay, yeah. I thought I read that, and I wanted to make sure before I said it. But yeah, wow. I think we've covered this record pretty thoroughly.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, I was surprised we hadn't done this one, but then at the same time, I also remembered that this incarnation of the show has only existed since like March. So
we haven't been giving people the choice.
It used to be more random
record.
And we'd pull a couple for people to look at and choose from, but now we've just given people like free. We just go like, here's the year, you pick what you want from that year. So like we did the fucking Wrath on one episode that just went up this week, and like nobody knows who that band is.
Yeah.
They're surprisingly cool, you know. It's just because they had a connection to that band, that's why they chose it. You chose this record because it means a lot to you specifically. Oh, yeah. And like that's what, and we're finding like a lot of people are picking stuff that just means a lot to them. So like maybe we'll start to see more people. Like maybe if we come back to 79 and offer it to someone else, they'll be like, I want to do that Germs record. It's like, well, we kind of did it. I mean,
we did the hell out of this.
We did it. We can do it again, but Dylan and I aren't going to have much more new to add to that.
Yeah.
How about that Clash record instead? You know, like that.
Yeah.
So,
well, some of those too. It's like at this point, does anyone need to write another word about a Beatles record? You know, like or a Dylan record? It's like, I mean, they have huge catalogs and they still have all just been done and dissected. And it's like I feel like again the Germs are well enough known that people who know, but there's also a huge swath of people that just never even heard of them. And I like that they're obscure enough. But it's not me being like insufferable and finding like a band that only put out like one single in 1963 and there's but even that is like there's a showmanship to being able to talk about what used to be like Death, right? Like 10 years ago, if you knew anything about Death, it was just like you're a record store nerd, and it's the purveyor of ephemera at that point, just talking about how esoteric these little tiny like regional releases could have been. And I don't know that anyone needs to hear you guys talk about that, right? Like this band that has 3 fans, so
unless that whoever comes on is like, I love this record so much and I want to hear why they love that record.
Yeah.
So Germs is like one of those bands that it's like they're iconic for what they did, but I bet a lot of people haven't listened to it, and especially under a certain age too.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah.
So yeah, I'm glad we're doing this. This is a really big record. I think when I told Dylan we were doing this, he was like, "Fuck yeah."
Nice. But yeah, my first reaction was like, yes, like this is a great record. It's not a record I've listened to a ton. It's not like a personal favorite, but I know it's everything that you said. Like it's capturing a moment, capturing this is what I'm feeling right now, and like it's just a perfect document of punk in 1979 in Los Angeles. Like it's
yeah, right, like. And to me, there's such a love and nostalgia for that. I mean, that literally is my childhood, right? So it kind of feels like my mother's love in a weird way, It's just like when everything was okay and I didn't have to worry about anything but what band I wanted to listen to, Like it's like when people wax nostalgic about how better the music was from a certain era. It's always when they were young, no one's ever like, oh, the music was better when I was 40. You know what I mean? It's like, and it's like the music wasn't any better when you were a kid. You were better when you were a kid. Like that's just like. It's like, yeah, you didn't have any fucking worries. Everything was taken care of. All you had was like, all that was important to you was what clothes you were going to wear and the music you were going to listen to. Yeah, so of course you have an emotional attachment to that time in your life, So, yeah, there's great music happening now. I always like to tell people.
Oh, absolutely.
Right now, someone is having the best music year of their life. Mm-hmm. So just maybe try to find that music instead of pretending that like 1980 had the best music or whatever. It's like, yeah. I was better in 79. It wasn't the music was better.
Thank you so much for doing the show. And it's kind of last minute. We had like a kind of a cancellation, and then like I had already asked you if you were interested in the show, and then our guest canceled, and so I was like, well, shit. Are you busy this week?
Not at all, man. This is all I'm doing. All I'm doing is managing like social media at this point.
That's what I was going to ask next. Tell people where to go to the Kickstarter and like what social media to follow you on and all that good stuff.
I would say primarily just go to the Kickstarter. So just go to Kickstarter. If you look for La Mano del Destino, it's the Hand of Destiny. So Lamano, La Mano, and then Del, and Destino is just like Destino. Go to the Kickstarter. I think once you type in La Mano, it's like the first thing that pops up. And there's a video there. You can see what I'm doing. I go through everything pretty thoroughly. And at the very last screen of that are all my social medias, because I have a bunch of them and I don't want to like list them all out now for you. So watch the video or scroll to the end, find my social media at the Kickstarter for La Mano del Destino.
And I'll put the link to the Kickstarter in the show notes. So if you are listening to it and you don't, you forget you're driving or something, you can always look at the show notes and there'll be a link there. So, yeah, that'll about do it. We're on all the social medias as well. We're at Punk Lotto Pod on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And yeah, I think that'll be it. So thanks a lot.
Thank you.